Studycat.
For the very kind introduction, and good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are around the world. Thanks for coming. So in this webinar, we're basically going to do three things. Firstly, we'll talk a bit about making stories, and I wrote making instead of writing because I think there's a bit more to stories than just writing them. But we'll talk about that, and I'll ask you for some of your ideas about stories and language and characters and plots and things like that. And then after that, we'll hopefully read some of the Studycat graded readers that Jake mentioned. So I've got the whole set of all 14 here, but I've picked out about 3 that I think that we'll look at today and we'll read together. And one of them I'll even get you to practice rewriting it with me. And last of all, we will sort of do some activities together for using stories. So hopefully those are all activities that you can use with your students in your own classes. And we'll also use those along with the stories. Okay, could I make the screen of the speaker bigger? I am not sure how to do that. I think you should be able to alter that on your own. Can you? I'm not sure. Maybe that's bigger. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure if I'm changing my screen or yours. But anyway, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is how to make stories. So I've got a really big question for all of you to begin with, which is, what is in a good story? So it'd be wonderful if in the chat you could type, what do you think is an ingredient of a good story? Type in anything you like. What do you think makes a good story? Mark says you can drag the speaker box to make it bigger. Yes. Great. Okay, so some ideas here already. We had excitement, content. Jake says cool characters. Right, absolutely. So I guess if you think about some of the most interesting TV shows or movies, thinking of something like Game of Thrones, which was good until the last series, lots of interesting characters and character development in that. I think we also had, let's see, conflict, says Dave Weller. Okay, so usually something has to go wrong. I remember a long time ago working for a school, and they produced some graded readers and there was no conflict at all. There were no problems that happened in the graded readers, and they were incredibly boring. So yes, absolutely, there has to be something that goes wrong, right? Some kind of conflict. Mark says a plot. Absolutely, we'll talk a lot about plot. Milad says pictures. Fantastic. Amir says antagonists and protagonists. Interesting. I'm not sure what the difference is actually between an antagonist and a protagonist. Ian says suspense. Yeah, fantastic. I guess for a lot of stories, if you think about TV shows, they'll often end with some kind of suspense, don't they? It makes you want to come back and enjoy the next episode. Kim Tang says a moral to the story. Yeah, it's a really good point. Actually, when we were writing these stories, I was talking to some friends and former colleagues who've also written other series of graded readers, and they were saying that in some places they will sort of check the morals of the story. I know in one of these stories that we have, one of our characters does something kind of dangerous. This is Tom, who you'll get to meet later, and he climbs on top of some, climbs inside some cupboards and gets up to mischief. Yeah, so maybe that's something that's a moral of the story. You might not want people to do that. Amir says twists. Absolutely, great. We'll talk about that. Humor, says Brand. Says Dan Brannigan. Messages. Fantastic. Okay, so I really just have sort of 3 main things. I'm sure all the things that you said are true, but today I've just tried to boil this down to 3 main parts. So we're going to talk about plot, characters, and language. Now, I should say that language is not always part of a story. You do get some stories where there is no language. There's some great picture books out there which have no language in them, but Since the stories that we're talking about today are really, partially at least, tools for teaching languages, language is a big part of them. All right, so let's begin by talking about plots. I'm sure there's lots of different models for plots out there, but I want to share with you two, which I think are quite common and quite interesting, and I'll ask you to think of some examples. For anyone who watches Rick and Morty or Solar Opposites, which I also highly recommend, you might be familiar with Dan Harmon. So Dan Harmon's one of the writers one of the main creators of those TV show cartoons. And this is he calls it his story circle, and it's broken into 8 parts. So we'll talk through these together, and it'd be wonderful if, as I'm talking, maybe you could leave some comments if you can think of any stories that you think fit this story circle. It would be great to hear. So this one starts off with a character at the beginning in a zone of comfort or familiarity, so things are pretty easy, but they desire something. There's something they want, and then they enter into an unfamiliar situation. Eventually, they have to adapt to that situation by changing somehow. So maybe that's the character development that someone mentioned earlier. And they get the thing that they wanted. So this is maybe like the conflict that someone mentioned earlier. And then they finally pay a heavy price for it. So they get what they wanted, but somehow it's changed them. And they go back to their familiar situation, and they realize that they've changed. Okay, so Peter says Winnie the Pooh. Fantastic. I would never have thought of Winnie the Pooh as being an example of this story circle, but that's a great one. I think something important to note here, and this is true of a lot of TV shows and movies and books and things, is that the ending and the beginning, which are next to each other on the circle, are actually quite similar. I'll show you the next slide, which is the same story circle, but illustrated using examples from Rick and Morty. So you can see here in number 1 and number 8, we've got the same characters in the same place, but somehow they've changed, right? So at the beginning, they look quite happy and contented, and at the end, it looks like they've gone through some very stressful situation. All right. And you can also see in this story circle that the bottom half, I think that artist here has done a good job. You see the bottom half is red, the top half is white. So the idea here is that the bottom half here is unfamiliar to them, right? So at the beginning, you're in a familiar place, you need something, you go there, and all of a sudden things are unfamiliar. You search, you find, you take, you return, and then things are familiar again, but somehow you have changed, like the character development we mentioned earlier. So that's an example from Rick and Morty. Any other ideas for this of similar, if you can think of TV shows or movies that go through this? While you're thinking about that, here is another very common model for how stories work. So this is called the hero's journey. And again, you can see at the top, things are normal, and at the bottom, we've got this unknown. So at the beginning, someone has a call to adventure. They might meet a mentor type person, and then eventually they cross the threshold and they're in the unknown. There's trials and failures, growth, new skills, all that character development. At some point, there might be death and rebirth. So some stories actually kind of stop here, right, with the main character failing, but maybe not. Maybe there's rejuvenation, changes, atonement, and then they get the thing that they wanted. And again, this idea that they've returned and they've changed and they're back to where they were at the beginning. Great. So Peter also says bear hunt. Yeah, another familiar one that I hadn't thought of before. I always think for this one, Lord of the Rings is a good example. So we've got Frodo at the beginning is pretty happy sitting in the Shire, and there's a call to adventure. He meets this mentor, Gandalf, and then him and Sam sort of cross over the threshold. There's all these trials, tribulations. They come close to death. They achieve what they wanted to achieve, and finally they get out. But at the end, you remember that Frodo has somehow changed, and he's not sort of able to stay happily where he was before, and he leaves. Great. Shrek, says Dave Weller, and Hunger Games. Yeah, Dan Brannigan says The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think you'll find this happens in so many different different stories and TV shows. And I think once you're aware of these, you start seeing them everywhere. I also find that you even see these within one part of one episode of a TV show. So I think Friends, if any of you are familiar with that, is often good for this. So I just picked out one tiny mini storyline from Friends. So this one, Phoebe has always wanted a bike, and one time Ross buys her a bike. And initially, Phoebe just pushes the bike around. She doesn't actually want to get on the bike, but eventually she does. She decides to try and learn how to ride the bike. I don't know if you can see this picture, but Ross is standing next to her, holding her up on the bike. So she's going through all these trials and tribulations, and she falls over and everything on the bike. And then at the end, the very final scene, we see Phoebe successfully riding around on the bike, but then there's a reveal and you can see that the bike actually has stabilizers. So there's also some sort of humor there. And I guess that's the sort of twist or suspense that someone mentioned earlier. So very often stories have all those things together. Great. The Good Dinosaur, says Newen. I don't know that one, but I'll look for that one. All right, so the next thing I think that all stories have is characters. I think that's part of just about every story. So I wanted to ask you all, maybe do you already know any of the Studycat characters? If you do, maybe you can share what you already know about them in the chat. I'll very quickly show you here. These are the characters that we had to work with when we created this series of books. So we had Studycat, who's the main protagonist, I suppose, the main star, but doesn't have to star in all the books. And for every character, we had some basic information, name, age, things that they like, and aspects of their personality, right? So Studycat's a fun, caring person, etc., or a fun, caring cat, maybe I should say. We also had Bob, who's one of my favorite characters. He's a little bit older. He loves eating, maybe slightly overweight, but he also likes sports, and he's a tough cat, and he protects his friends. We've got Ali, who's someone who loves reading and loves talking and sleeping. Kitty, who's the youngest and also the smallest of the characters. She's a little bit more shy than the other cats. Tom, who I think it doesn't really say it in here, but I remember earlier when we started writing these stories, we found out that Tom was kind of a little bit annoying. He loves showing off, right? So I think if you think of most TV shows, most books, most stories, there's not really any perfect characters in them. And having someone, I think, like Tom, who's got a bit of a flaw that maybe is self-centered and likes showing off, is actually really great. And we'll show you what Tom gets up to later. Okay, so those are some things about the characters that we used in these books. But next, when it came to writing these books, we started off with some language. So I'm going to show you here some of the basic language from the Studycat app in a big spreadsheet. You can see there's quite a lot in there, too much to read. But I'm going to show you the language from 2 units, obviously very vocabulary focused. So that's from unit, I think, number 13. So here's some of our language here. We've got friend, brother, sister, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, very similar, and uncle and cousin. And here's another one from the first unit. So maybe slightly lower level. We've got red, blue, green, yellow, orange, purple, pink, brown, gray, black, and white. All right, so lots of vocabulary for colors there. So I want to throw out a question to everyone. I've got 3 questions for you. Maybe you can pick one of the questions and type an answer in the chat box. So just taking these 2 units as an example, when would children talk about colors? Or when would children say words like brother or sister or mom or dad? What sort of situations might they say those in? And here's another question for you. What other language do you think children might use with these? So what kind of situation might children use something like red? Like what other language would go along with that? And finally here, any ideas for how this could be part of a story? Okay, so great. And so Anne says, yeah, talking about their family. Dave says, yeah, telling friends who is in their family. Great. So maybe making introductions. Maybe one time that you might talk about people in your family. Graham Dan says painting. Yes. So that's an interesting one, right? Because I guess if you're painting, usually that's a silent pastime, isn't it? Can't imagine Van Gogh talking as he's going, but I suppose you could have in a story one character asking for paints, right? Can you give me the red, give me the blue, yellow please, something like that. Absolutely. Great. So Mark here says talking about the colors around them. I think one of the challenging things with this is, right, that usually if you can see something, and I think a lot of course books do this, right? We have sometimes very strange dialogues and course books where people say, oh, what's this? And the other person go, oh, that's a cat, or what color is this? And the other person says, oh, that's red. But of course, in real life, unless we're talking to someone who's blind or someone who's never seen a dog before, you probably wouldn't really have to do that, right? So it's sometimes difficult to think of times when people might say these. Great. So Palak says maybe talking about clothes that they like, or it could be ordering clothes, favorite toys. Yeah. Palak says talking about vegetables. Don't know how you do that. Maybe my grandpa looks like a broccoli or something like that. Yeah. Fashion, food, fruits, colors. Great. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you the very first story that we wrote for this series. So this one was all about colors. So this is the front cover, and it's called Kitty's Balloons. Yeah, so we'll look through this together, and then afterwards we'll ask about what you think the language was like and how authentic is the language. Okay, so this is, remember, the very first level that we have. So the very beginning here, we have Kitty, you can see, and Bob next to her. And they see some balloons, right? And Kitty says, balloons! And then they start walking towards the balloons. And what do you think is going to happen? Kitty orders a balloon. So this is where the whole story really starts, and the colors start getting used, right? So Kitty wants a balloon. And so she says, red, please. We'll talk much more about this sentence later, which caused a lot of controversy. And then Kitty, you see over here, she has her red balloon, but she wants another balloon. Kitty wants another balloon. So she says, blue, please. And we can see the balloon salesman handing over another balloon. And then Kitty wants another balloon. So Kitty says, yellow, please. Okay, so this story so far, not very much conflict. Can anyone guess? What do you think what conflict might happen in the story? What's going to go wrong? I don't know if you can see here, but Bob is standing at the side, sweating. Can anyone guess? What do you think is, what disaster awaits Kitty by buying all these balloons? Great, so Amir says, yeah, one color not existing. Emma says running out of money. Great. I love it. Jake says the balloons might go pop. Yeah, might scare someone. Anne says, the balloons fly away. And Paul says, yeah, maybe Bob's worried about who's going to pay. Maybe Bob's forgotten his wallet. Great. So it says she can't get so many balloons. She's going to fly away. Yes, absolutely. So that is exactly what happened. So on the next page, Kitty gets lifted up by the balloons. There we go. So Kitty now is flying. And she says, help. And poor Bob down here, you can see he's sweating even more. All right. So this is our point of conflict. But Bob saves the day. I love the expression on his face here. So Bob helps Kitty, grabbing her by the foot. And she says, thanks, Bob. And then Kitty lets the balloons go, but she keeps one. And here we go, the end of the story. Kitty, she's got her one balloon, the red balloon, and that is Kitty happy. Okay, so this story is actually inspired by a true story. I don't know if you've heard of this. A guy called Larry Walters. I read about this, I think, about 10 or 12 years ago. In the early 80s, he tied a bunch of balloons to a garden chair. He ended up something like 40,000 feet up, I think, above Los Angeles airport, and got into a lot of trouble for it. But that's what inspired this story. So you can see here at the beginning, we've got, Kitty and Bob, and everything's fine. And then Kitty desires something. She sees the balloons, right? And then eventually she buys some balloons. And then all of a sudden, she's kind of in this unfamiliar situation. She's being lifted off the ground. She's got what she wanted, which was the balloons, but she has to let some balloons go. Maybe that's her paying the price for it. And in the end, she returns to her familiar situation, but a little bit changed. Right now, she's got one balloon instead of three. Now, obviously, this story circle usually takes, in an episode of Rick and Morty, 25 minutes to go through. In Lord of the Rings, I think it probably takes about 6 hours to go through that whole story. Here we went through it in just 8 pages. Okay, but that's a little example there. Now, next, I wanted to talk to you about the language, because this wasn't me that was doing this so much. This was Jake, but this became an interesting point. What do you think about this? Do you think "red, please"? Is that a sentence? Do you think that's good English? Do you think that's acceptable for children to see "red, please" in a dialogue, or is that wrong? Yeah, so Peter says, I think so. Palak says it's okay. Izmir says, that is good and authentic English. Yeah, so I certainly felt that that was probably the simplest sentence that you could make with a color. So maybe it's not quite a sentence, maybe it is, it's hard to say, but it certainly seems like something authentic that students or children might say. And personally, I think that's what we need to be doing. You probably noticed in the story that there were 2 different types of language. If we look here, you can see there's some speech bubbles, which are more simple, and some sentences down the bottom, which are a bit more complex. So our idea here was that these ones would be for students to read. That was our concept. And these ones would maybe be for teachers or for parents to read. So those ones at the bottom are a little bit more complicated. All right. But I also wanted to ask you all, if anyone speaks another language, which I'm sure most of you do, especially if you can speak either German, French, Spanish, or Chinese, how would you translate "red, please"? Yeah, you know Greek? Great. Maybe you can translate. How would you say "red, please" in Greek or in any other language that you can speak? It would be wonderful to hear. I know that when Jake was getting these books translated into other languages, they had a lot of debate. How do you say "red, please" in another language? Great. So Farsi, great. Just 2 words, and it looks like the same as Greek. That's interesting. Okay, and then Mark's one, that's a bit longer. 我要红色的. Okay, is that the language of that they speak in Taiwan, is it? Is that right? Minyan Yu, maybe. Great. Rotta Betin, fantastic, Anne. Great. Great, and that was Chinese. Yeah, Chao Xin Mao Da. I have no idea how to speak Vietnamese. I was just making that up. So lots of different opinions on this. So some people said, oh, you can't say something that short in another language. This is how they ended up being translated into those different languages. So Spanish was un rollo, por favor. I don't speak much Spanish, as you probably guessed for that. And you're very close to what someone wrote there. Instead of Rottenbitter, this was einen Rottenbitter. Yeah, so very, very close to what you had. And une rouge, s'il vous plaît, for French. So I guess that's like a red one, please, I suppose. And in Chinese, this went all the way up to someone who's got a PhD in translating English language course books. And many arguments about that. But this ended up being like 我要红色, which I guess is closer to saying I want red, I suppose. But I think in Chinese, people rarely use the word for please. So that was how we translated those into different languages. Okay, so as promised, we're now about halfway through. So we're going to read a couple of stories together, and we'll do a couple of examples. So the first story I wanted to share with you is this one. So this one looks very sad, doesn't it? So this is called 汤姆的生日. Right, don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you in Chinese. Here's the English version. So this one is called Tom's Birthday. And we're going to read this one together and do some activities from this story. So first question I wanted to ask you all. So this book is called Tom's Birthday. What language, what words do you think you'll see in this book? Okay, so it's a book, it's about Tom's birthday. What words in English do you think will appear in the book? Type them in. Great. Kumatang says cake. Fantastic. Maria says toys. Miriam says party, gifts, balloons. Yeah, you must think we're very big on balloons in these stories. Fantastic. A few of you said there, happy birthday. Great. I guess that's something that's usually in every birthday, isn't it? Presents, says Newen. Friends, says Strilek. Great point. Miriam says candles. I guess that would be part of a cake, right? I'm sorry, I think that's Greek, so I can't read it, but someone else has said sofa. Well, I guess there's a sofa here on the cover, right? So I can see why you'd say that. And Augustina says gifts. Great. Spaghetti, says Pamela. That's interesting, spaghetti. I know in Chinese culture, I don't know if this is the same in any other cultures, that people eat noodles on their birthday. I think there's something to do with long noodles and long life. So maybe those are similar. Palak says a hat. Great. And we've got cake, party, yeah, happy birthday, friends. All right, so we're going to read this one together. But before we do that, one more pre-reading activity for you. We can see the cover of the book here, right? So this is the cover. What I want you all to do is ask a question. Okay, so maybe this cover has made you curious about Tom's birthday. Can you ask a question to the book? All right, so what question would you like to be able to answer? Great, so George says, why is Tom sad? Fantastic. That's what I would want to know as well. Why is he sad? Peter wants to know, does it have a happy ending? Great. Dan, has noticed here that we've got some people behind the sofa. So Dan thinks they're hiding. Dan wants to know, why are they hiding from Tom? Paul wants to know, where are Tom's friends? Yeah, so usually on your birthday, you might spend it with friends or family. Yeah, but here Tom looks like he's all by himself. And Mark wants to know, who are these characters? back here behind the sofa. Great. And Peter wants to know, is it a surprise? Fantastic. So we'll come back to those questions at the end. Okay, so let's read this one together. This is Tom's birthday. That's the inside cover. So here we go. It's Tom's birthday, and here he is. Look, there he is. He's got a hat on, so well done if you said that. And there's all these presents here, but he's by himself. So Tom, can you see him? He's thinking here about these two old people. And it says, Tom wants to see his grandma and his grandpa. So he's thinking about them. So he's going to go for a walk. And here he is. He's in their house. And Tom says, hello? But he can't find them. But that's okay. He still looks happy. So next, Tom thinks again. And Tom wants to see his aunt and uncle. So here he is. He's still in Grandma and Grandpa's house, but he's thinking about his aunt and uncle. So his other people in his family. So Tom goes to their house. Here he is again. Hello? But still, he can't find them. And who's this up here? Tom's now thinking of his little brother. So Tom wants to see his little brother. I love the little stars here, like he's had a good idea. So Tom's going to go and find his little brother. Do you think he'll find his little brother? Do you think he'll find him? Let's see. Here Tom is. No, says Kieran. Right. So now he's in a park. You can see here's the football that his brother had, and Tom says, "Hello," but he can't find his brother. So who does he think of next? He thinks of his friends. So well done. Anyone who said friends is a word in the book. So Tom wants to see his friends. What do you think? Do you think he'll be able to find his friends? No, maybe not. Let's see. Can Tom find his friends? Here he is again. Hello? He can't find them. So Tom's given up on friends and family. Now he's looking for someone else he likes. This is his teacher. This is what teachers look like in Catland. So Tom wants to see his teacher. Well, do you think he's going to see his teacher? Let's have a look. He's in the classroom. Hello? No, he can't find her. Oh, poor Tom. So how do you think Tom feels now? What do you think? And what's Tom going to do next? Yeah, so Jake here has a really good point that we're using the word hello here, in a different way, right? So maybe this is probably the first word everyone learns in English. But it can actually also mean, is anyone there? Yeah. So in Chinese, I think that's the other language I speak. You don't say hello when you're looking for people. You say 有人吗? Like, are there people here? Right? And Jake makes a great point that really here we're using the word hello in a different context. So students are learning something else about the word hello. Thanks, Jake. Great point, or whoever made that point. Okay, so Tom, he's going home. So Miriam was right. Tom walks home. And look at, he looks pretty sad here. I love the artistry here. So you can see Tom's ears. If you notice them here and you compare them to his ears at the beginning, right? You can see here his ears are sort of standing straight up. So he looks much happier at the beginning from his ears. But you can see here, here's Tom walking home. He looks very sad. Yeah. And 2 says, repeated language. Yes, so absolutely. So in this book, we've got the same words again and again. Yeah, he can't find her. He wants to see and hello. Absolutely. So Tom's walking home. What's going to happen next? He opens the door and it's a surprise. And everyone says, "Happy birthday, Tom." So a happy ending for Tom. And here he is. And you can see some of the people, or some of the cats, I should say, who are behind the sofa. Now they're here. And we've got a cake And you can see here's the teacher that you saw earlier, grandpa, the aunt, the uncle, yeah, grandma, and all of his friends. Okay, so to go back to the beginning, so which of the words did you notice that you predicted? So I know some of you, let's see if I can go back here. What were some of the words that we had in there? Did we see the word cake or toys or party or balloons or birthday present, candles, sofa, gifts? What about friends? Did we see any of those words? Yeah, so we saw friends, I think. We saw friends. And I think we had the word surprise. Yes, we did have the word surprise, and someone said surprise. It's a surprise. Yeah, so well done for those. And then what about what questions can you answer? So you guys all had some questions at the beginning. Can you answer some of your own questions? So for example, why? I remember someone said, why is Tom sad? So at the beginning, why was Tom sad? Can you tell us? Or can anyone tell us who was hiding behind the sofa? That was another one. Or can anyone tell us, what was another question that we had? Does it have a happy ending? Yeah, so you can see here the idea is that, yeah, he couldn't find anyone. That's why he was sad, says Anthony. Absolutely. And Palak said, yes, these people were hiding behind the sofa. So this is actually Tom's brother here. And this was, I think this is Kitty. Yeah, well done. I noticed that as well. All right, so this is obviously a very simple activity that you can use with your students if you're using stories. So you can start off with get the students to guess what words are going to come up in the story, and also get students to ask questions. And I love doing the questions one because very often in course books they have questions in them that that are written by a course book author. But of course, if you can get students to write their own questions, then those questions are graded to the level of the students. Great. So just like your one, why was Tom sad? Because he couldn't see his family members. All right. And again, I think this is a little bit like the story circle. Tom, at the beginning, it's his birthday. He's happy, but he wants something, wants to meet people. So he goes on this journey looking for people, and actually really didn't get what he wanted until the very end when he was returned to the familiar situation and realized how happy he was to have his family. Okay, so next we're going to look at one more story. This one is called Fishing. So what we're going to do is we'll read this one together quite quickly, and at the end we'll do a couple of activities with it. So you can see here, here's the title. We've got some fish. What else can you see here on the cover? Maybe you can tell us, what can you see on the cover of this book? Great, there's a hook. Fantastic. Yeah, so someone says they can see a crab and some fish. Great, Miriam can see the sea. Yeah, absolutely. So where do you think these hooks go? What do you think is at the top? Up here. Great, we've got some seaweed. Yeah, who do you think, where do you think these hooks go? Anthony says they might go up to a beach or a harbor. Great, so we'll see later on. Okay, so let's look at this one. This is fishing. I think this is my favorite story. So here we are. We're at, I guess this is Tom's house. And Tom says, I'm bored. And Studycat has a great idea. Studycat says, let's go fishing. I love the drawing here of Tom looking bored. Okay, so here they all are. We've got Studycat over here, Ali, there's Ali, Kitty, and Tom go to the beach. Well done, whoever said beach earlier. And they go by train. So that's them in a train carriage, beautifully drawn. And here they are on a boat. So here's Ali. There's the crab. And Ali says, I've got a fish. And there's Ali's fish. And Studycat says, I've got a little fish. So tiny little fish here. Okay. But now here's Tom, and Tom says, oh, look at him sweating. He says, look, I've got a big fish. And look at the expressions here. Ali looks so shocked, doesn't she? Looks so surprised. So, what do you think Tom's big fish is going to be? Do you want to guess? What do you think is at the bottom on the hook? What do you think Tom is going to catch? Do you think he'll catch a big fish? Keenan says, boots. Jake says, a shark. Oh, great. So Amir thinks that Tom will get dragged into the water. Okay, Richard also thinks a boot. Great, or a treasure chest. Ooh, that would be exciting, wouldn't it? Or a boot. I feel excited just hearing about the treasure chest. Okay, so everyone else is wondering. Here's Studycat, and Studycat thinks it's a shark at the end. Okay, and Ali, here's Ali's thought bubble. Ali thinks it's a whale. Wow, so big, so huge. And here's Kitty. Kitty thinks it's a turtle, a big turtle. Yeah, so let's see what happens. Everyone helps Tom. So we've now got all 4 cats pulling on this. And Tom says, I've got a very big fish. So you see Tom's very, very confident. Let's see, what does Tom pull out the water? Oh no! What did Tom get? He got a tire. Oh, and I love the expression here on Tom's face of absolute shock. Oh no, it's a tire. Poor Tom. So how do you think Tom feels now? What do you think Tom feels at the end of this? Is he happy or sad? What do you think? Disappointed. Yeah, unhappy, disappointed. Absolutely. So here's Tom, and you can see his ears. You see this in every story where Tom's unhappy, his ears go down because he's got this in front of him. And look, here's he's crying as well. Poor Tom, he looks very sad. But Studycat says it's okay. And we've got a little light bulb, bing, from Studycat. So what do you think is going to happen? What do you think Studycat's idea is? Why is it okay, do you think? Why is it all right? What do you think Studycat has thought of here to solve this problem? Well, I'll show you. So the next day, here's Tom back in his garden, and here's the tire. And he says, I love my swing. Great. So you can see that at the end, the scene at the end, I think, is exactly the same. See if I can find it here, as the scene at the beginning, right? They're in exactly the same place, exactly the same people, right? But things have changed a little bit, right? Instead of being bored, now Tom has a swing. So see, at the beginning, right, we're at home, zone of comfort, things are easy, and Tom is bored, wants something, wants some entertainment. So they go to this unfamiliar situation, looking for fish, and Tom pays a heavy price. He ends up being disappointed. At the end, they go back. But actually, the sort of change from this journey has been something positive. Okay, so wanted to do, just before we finish, a couple of fun activities with you that you can do with your students afterwards. So we're going to write here Tom's diary. So what do you think Tom would write in his diary at the end of this? So Tom's gone home, it's the end of the day, and he's writing his diary. What do you think Tom's going to say? Dear diary, today I... What do you think he might write? Tom might write in his diary. Great. So today I learned a lesson. Fantastic. Okay, today I learned a lesson. Anyone else? What else do you think Tom would write in his diary? Today yes, I learned a lesson. I caught a massive tire. Yeah, great. Okay, and he went fishing with his friends. Yeah. I went fishing with my friends. Great. And Miriam says, or Jake says, I cleaned up ocean. Great. Fishing with my friends. I cleaned up the ocean. So this is one of my favorite activities to do with students after doing some sort of a story in a course book. You can get students to pretend to be one of the characters and then write something in their diary. Or if you're teaching students who may be too young for that, then you can get students to tell you what to write in the diary. Yeah, or it could be a little video recording. So quite similar. Next little activity. So imagine that you can interview Tom. Imagine that we've finished reading this story. What questions would you want to interview? What questions do you want to ask Tom? You just read this story about him. What's a question you might like to ask him? Anyone want to give us a question? Okay, how did you get your energy? Yeah, great. Thank you, Palak. Yeah, so here's a question. Why do you have so much energy? Great. Oh, great. And okay, Richard here says, do you recommend fishing in the sea? Says Richard. Please forgive my bad spelling. Yeah. Oh, great. I love this question from Amir. Yeah. Do you prefer the tire or prefer to catch fish? Yeah, what do you like more? That's a great question, Amir. Great. And Beverly also has another one here. Would you go fishing again? Great. Would you go fishing? Whoops. Would you go fishing again? Great. So what I want you guys to do now is just pick a question that someone else asked in the chat and answer the question. So you can pretend to be Tom, answer one of the questions, right? So what do you think? Do you recommend fishing in the sea? Are you happier with a tire or happier with a fish? Yeah, what's better, a tire swing or a fish for dinner? What do you think? Will you go fishing again, Tom? So you can answer one of those questions in the chat. Pretend to be Tom. What do you think? Would you prefer Tom, to get a fish or a swing? Yeah, and Jake says you can even do this in the student's first language. So when I do this with students, what I get students to do is to write the questions by themselves. I do this after they've written the diary, so the students already get the chance to get into character, pretend to be the character, and then they go and interview other students. So it's a little bit like doing a survey, and then students can write down the answers. Great. So Miriam says, next time I'll just go to the fish market. Great. Very, very funny. Peter says, yeah, I enjoyed the day. And Richard says, the tire was cooler than the fish. I much prefer the tire than the fish. So I love the swing in the new garden. Great. And here's the last one. I don't think we've got time to do this, but here's another sort of post-reading activity that I like doing with students. So you can get students to take the text and then change it into a little newspaper article. So often this involves changing the tense. So you notice that our stories were mainly in the present simple. So part of the reason we did that was to make these easy, right? But for slightly older students, you can get students to change what happens in the story and change it into the past tense. So maybe we could do this very quickly. What could be a title, a headline for this story. Let's pretend the local news is coming to interview Tom, or they've written a story about this. What do you think their headline might be? Maybe they might say, joy. Yes, joy for Tom. It would be in capitals, wouldn't it? Joy for Tom. Great, a big catch. Great. Yeah. So you get the idea, and then you can get students to make their own. You can include some examples maybe from the diary or something like that. Oh, what a serendipity. Yeah, exactly. What did you learn? What did Tom learn from this? So I think that's also a really enjoyable activity for students and gets them to do a little bit more with a story. Okay, so let's wrap up. We've got about 5 minutes or so left to finish up, but these, just to go through some of those activities that we looked at today. So I had a few different pre-reading activities there. We predicted the words, right? So you can do that with students as well with a book, show them the cover, ask them what words do you think will appear. As Jake said earlier, if the students can't speak enough English yet, you could ask them to say in their first language and you can translate them, write them on the board. And then as you go through the story, you can check them off, right? You can even get students to write the story with their own words. We didn't have time for this today, but that's a fun activity as well. So getting students to look at a story, you can blank out all the words, and then you can get students to add in their own words in the story before reading it. Nice way to get students to use what language they already have. Another simple one we had was asking questions. I find a lot of time in class, it's always the teachers who ask the questions rather than the students. Doing this, getting students to ask questions at the beginning is a nice way to get students to ask some questions. And then post-reading, we had a few of these, right? Write a diary, pretend you're the main character, write a diary of what happened today, or you could write that together as a class. Students can tell the teacher what to write. You can do that interview, right? Write some questions, ask someone else pretending to be that character. If you've got a story with 2 different characters, and you can give different students different roles. And you can also get students to do something like make a newspaper article out of it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Jake, if you're there, it'd be wonderful if you come back on. I know you're going to do, oh, there you are. Fantastic. Yeah, so just to wrap up, can't get to the last slide, but never mind. But we looked at today some different aspects of stories, what makes a story, some different ways of looking at plots, always having some sort of conflict, character development, language. We obviously read a couple of stories together, and then finally we looked at some of those activities that you can use with your students. Oh.